As the Daiei Sunrise logo appears, I'd like to welcome you to Gammera, the Giant Monster, directed by the late Noriaki Yuasa. I'm August Ragone, the author of Eiji Tsuburaya, Master of Monsters. Ominous planes coated in anti-radar paint cross into U.S. airspace. It's the height of the Cold War, and nuclear conflict was a very palatable reality. With the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, Red China's first nuclear test in 1964, and Vietnam escalations in 1965, Japan seemed to be caught in a nuclear minefield. Here, our main characters, who we'll meet later, arrive at an Inuit encampment to meet with the chief, played by beloved character actor Yoshio Yoshida, born 1911. Outside of Japan, Yoshida is best known for his appearance as the old fisherman Gohei in Yoshimitsu Banno's Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, 1971, and as Jusuke in Kimiyoshi Yasuda's 100 Monsters, 1968. We'll come back to Yoshida in a couple of minutes. Screenwriter Nissan Takahashi may have taken a cue from Sidney Lumet's 1964 film Failsafe in regards to the dreaded nuclear tension of the time. This was contrary to Toho's monster movies, which shied away from world politics, and when they didn't, the enemy were fairy tale nations such as Rolisica in Ishiro Honda's Mothra in 1961. Each studio had a different tone to their productions, and Daiei's were no exception. The captain of the Chidori Maru is played by character actor Jun Osanai, who appeared in over 100 films at Daiei, starting in the early 1950s, and can be seen in Mitsuo Murayama's sci-fi film noir, The Invisible Man Meets the Flyman, 1957, Yasuzo Masamura's Black Test Car, 1962, and Red Angel, 1966. We'll see him next as a Defense Force officer in Shigeo Tanaka's Gammera vs. Barragan in 1966. After the war, Japanese studios began to make more modern films, and U.S. studios were also shooting films in Japan, so both needed to employ local foreigners to pepper these productions. Unfortunately, in the early days, a lot of talent was solicited from hotel lobbies or from military bases, talent or no talent. These gentlemen appear to have actually been yanked off of one of the military bases at Yokota or New Sano, and while they can't act a lick, the producers thought that the Japanese audience, for whom Gammera was intended, wouldn't notice or care. Most of these scenes were originally grouped together in Takahashi's screenplay, but were broken up by film editor Tatsuji Nakashizu to allow for better pacing. There are other instances, as well as scenes dropped from the screenplay or shot and deleted in the final version, which I'll point out later. The on-screen credits list the fighter pilot here solely by the surname of Brown. He has since been identified as Hank Brown in Japanese reference materials. What does that add? Nothing more than putting a name to a face. The miniatures for the Supersonic Fighter seen here were based on the Corvair F-106 Delta Dart, or simply known as the Six, employed by the United States Air Force as their primary all-weather ultimate interceptor during the Cold War, specifically designed to take out the strategic bombers of our enemies. Introduced into service in 1959, the Six was armed with an array of missiles and even a 1.5 kiloton warhead-tipped air-to-air rocket. The Six served in the U.S., Alaska, and Iceland, so the filmmakers were accurate in featuring them. With a long and distinguished service record, the Six was retired in 1988. Art director Akira Inoue designed the Devil's Birds, the strategic bombers from an unknown nation. Interestingly, these are a more streamlined take on the UK's Handley Victor B-1, modified to give the impression of the Soviets M4, M50, as well as Red China's Xi'an H6, which dropped China's first nuclear test in 1965. Coated in black, it lends these birds a sinister raven-like appearance. Another commie bites the dust thanks to the air superiority of Uncle Sam. But where's Slim Pickens when you need 'em? The crash detonates a nuclear payload aboard the bomber, which will awaken a slumbering giant. Screenwriter Takahashi, taking a page out of Toho's playbook, presents a trio of characters: Dr. Hidaka, played by Eiji Funakoshi, his assistant, Miss Yamamoto, played by Harumi Kiritachi, and Mr. Aoyagi, a journalist, played by Junichiro Yamashita, who will be with us throughout the film. Now, this is an effective matte painting of the mushroom cloud, And do you notice the optical flourish? Now here's one of the coolest, perhaps not the best, but it's definitely one of the coolest introductions of a monster in this genre, with Tadashi Yamaguchi's music building slowly to a crescendo as the ice starts belching forth from the opening crevice, and then crawling up from the depths, his eyes blazing, is Gammera. Daikaiju Gammera was released in Japan on November 27, 1965, on the top end of a double bill with Yoshiyuki Kuroda's New Kurama Tengu Duel at Gojo Zaka, a juvenile period actioner featuring superstar Raizo Ichikawa. Now, all we know about these gentlemen in this scene are their last names from the credits. There's Richard, Strahan, Ronson, and Hartman, but sorting out who's who is the question. The man on the left at the teletype can also be seen in Yasuharu Hasebe's Black Type Killers, 1966. Considered the father of Gammera, a character and film series he truly cared about, director Noriaki Yuasa was born into a theatrical family on September 28, 1933, in Akatsutsumi, a posh neighborhood in the Setagaya ward of Tokyo. Not only was he the son of noted actor Hikaru Hoshi, his grandmother was the famous stage and screen actress Hideko Azuma. In his teens, Yuasa relocated to Kyoto to attend Oki High School and later graduated from the Faculty of Law at Hosei University. In 1957, Yuasa entered the director's program at Daiei Tokyo Studios and as an assistant director studied under such luminaries as Chinotsuke Kinugasa, Koji Shima, Umetsugu Inoue, and Yuzo Kawashima. In 1964, he made his directorial debut with the youth musical If You're Happy, Clap Your Hands, starring pop singer Kyu Sakamoto. Despite the participation of Sakamoto, who had already starred in a hit film series at Toho, and topping the international record charts with Sukiyaki, no one was clapping for Yuasa's musical, but with Gammera he redeemed himself. Before becoming an actor, Yoshida studied Japanese art at the Kyoto Municipal College of Art, where he became involved in restoring important murals. He became a high school art teacher before being drafted, and after the war, started acting in stage productions. He joined Toei Studios in 1952. Soon he was a regular fixture in Toei's sword actioners, usually playing cutthroat villains, and in the 1960s he went freelance. He also found work at Daiei, Toho, and Shochiku, where he was the villain in Torajiro's Dreams in the Tora-san movie series. He also flourished on television and was able to let his comic talent shine in children's programs, most notably as Mephisto in Toei's 1966 fantasy series Little Devil, of which he is still fondly remembered in Japan. Yoshida's later years were spent painting in his home in Kyoto, and on December 22, 1986, he suffered a major heart attack and passed away at the age of 75. Connecting Gammera to Atlantis was Takahashi's offhanded solution to the monster's origin, implying that he is not a prehistoric creature. In his screenplay, it was the lost continent of Murasia, not Atlantis, that was named. Playing zoologist Dr. Eiji Hidaka is Eiji Funakoshi. Born in Tokyo on March 17, 1923 as Eijiro Funakoshi, he was called the Japanese Marcello Mastroianni during the heyday of his career, which spanned 52 years. Funakoshi was one of Daiei's biggest stars during the golden age of Japanese cinema and was married to actress Yumiko Hasegawa, the niece of the legendary actor Kazuo Hasegawa. Now, we'll come back to Funakoshi and how he became an actor a little later on. Coming along on Dr. Hidaka's expedition were several journalists, played by supporting actors Ichiro Ise, Shinji Sahara, and Hajime Munichika, while the helmsman was played by Hiroya Kita, all of whom appeared in dozens of films during their tenures at the studio. While Gammera later became the friend to children, in this first outing he is full of rage and violence, attacking the Chidori Maru and killing everyone aboard. Daiei had produced a number of visual effects films before Gammera, helmed by Yonesaburo Tsukiji. Born September 15, 1923, he began his career as an assistant cameraman in the late 1930s, and joined Daiei at its inception in 1942. In 1954, he created his first visual effects in Kozo Saeki's Snow Atop Mount Fuji, for which his optical work was especially praised. Bigger productions followed, featuring scenes of mass destruction, such as Kojishima's Warning from Space 1956 and Shigeo Tanaka's The Great Wall 1962. But Daiei had never tackled Toho's seemingly patented Godzilla-style movie, and before Gammera, no other Japanese studio dared. This finely detailed miniature of the Chidori Maru, which Gammera is about to destroy, was approximately 10 feet long. Like Eiji Tsuburaya at Toho, Tsukiji also experimented with the medium, here using animation for the men fleeing the ship. In a 1995 interview, Yuasa noted that for all the Arctic scenes, large blocks of ice were brought into the studio and were carved into peaks, large outcroppings, and shaved down to simulate snow. The studio itself also had to be refrigerated. Of course, all that ice didn't stay frozen long because of the bright lights, and years later, Yuasa chuckled that the melting ice damaged the sound stages. In this scene, cut from the US version, the United States Air Force pilot is played by Ikuji Oka. Some may find that funny, but during World War II, Nebraskan Ben Croakey and Hawaiian Wau Kau Kong were the first Asian American fighter pilots in the U.S. Army Air Corps. Thousands of Asian Americans have served throughout U.S. history, going as far back as the Civil War. Here's a nice establishing matte painting of New York City, even more effective because of the black and white photography. This is the unbilled Johann Gunther, aka John Gunther, a German expat. Japanese producers would cast by a person's looks, whether they were European or Turkish, to pass as Americans, or whatever nationality the screenplay required. Now, let's get back to actor Eiji Funakoshi. After high school, Funakoshi wanted to study art and photography, but his grandfather enrolled him into the economics department of Senshu University in 1941. In 1944, he was transferred to the Naval Academy at Toyohama and graduated officers' training in January 1945. After the war ended in August, Funakoshi's father helped him open a small china shop in the Shinjuku ward of Tokyo. Now, as a prank, Funakoshi's brother Eitaro decided to enter his sibling in a Daiei's second New Faces talent contest. Eitaro, under the name Ko Mishima, was an actor at Toho. In March 1947, Funakoshi was accepted and began to work on his debut, Shigeo Tanaka's The Second Embrace. He didn't take acting seriously at first, but eventually decided to leave retail behind. After dozens of mostly unrewarding pictures, director Kon Ichikawa began casting Funakoshi in such films as Nihonbashi in 1956 and The Pit in 1957. In 1959, Funakoshi was catapulted to fame for his role as Private Tamura in Ichikawa's Fire on the Plains, winning several Best Actor awards and making him one of the most respected actors of his generation. Funakoshi's name added significant marquee value to Gammera, and while only 43 during the production, he was made look 10 years older for the role. He continued to star in Daiei films such as Yasuzo Masumura's Blind Beast, 1969, until the studio's bankruptcy in 1971. Funakoshi maintained a high-profile career on television and the occasional film until his retirement in 1999. In 2007, on his 84th birthday, Funakoshi suffered a fatal stroke. His son Eiichiro has followed in his acting footsteps. Funakoshi and the Giant Turtle will be reunited in Gammera vs. Gilon, 1969. In a cameo that audiences would immediately recognize is an actor and comedian known as Bokuzen Hidari, who has played plenty of drunks, but himself was a teetotaler. Born as Ichiro Mikajima on February 20th, 1894, he became a stage actor at the age of 20 in 1914 and made his film debut at 55 with Tadashi Imai's A Woman's Face in 1949. He appeared in over 160 films until his passing on May 26, 1971, including prominent roles in Akira Kurosawa films, such as Ohara in Ikiru, 1952, and as Yohei in Seven Samurai, 1954. He can also be seen as the old servant in Ishiro Honda's The Human Vapor, 1960. The original screenplay follows him home, where he tries to explain this first encounter to a doubting wife, only to be scolded for losing his lunchbox. The scene was rewritten and moved to later in the film. The subject of flying saucers was also extremely topical worldwide during the time that Gammera was produced. Playing Aoyagi, the character wasn't allowed a given name for some odd reason, was Junichiro Yamashita, born in Tokyo on February 19, 1939. Joining Shochiku Kyoto Studios, he made his film debut in Kunio Matoi's Dangerous Love Letter, 1959. and then moved to Shochiku's Ofuna Studios in Tokyo. After his contract was up with Shochiku, he went freelance and joined the highly respected Hayuza Theater Company. In 1964, he joined up with Daiei and appeared in Mitsuo Murayama's Fighting Dogs, 1964, and Kimiyoshi Yasuda's Zatoichi's Cane Sword, 1967. Yamashita also starred in the third Daimajin film, Daimajin Strikes Again, 1966, directed by Kazuo Mori. He retired from acting in 1970 to become a businessman, but returned 6 years later. Yamashita has had a very steady career in films and television ever since. Now, playing Kyoko Yamamoto is Harumi Kiritachi. Born as Mitsuru Kiritachi in 1943, as the daughter of screen star Noboru Kiritachi. In 1960, Harumi began her career with the Takarazuka Review, but left the group in 1963 and found employment as a secretary for the famous illustrator Sentaro Iwata. The next year, she joined Daiei Studios and took the stage name of Harumi. After a few starring roles in Shigeo Inoue's The 17-Year-Old Wolf, Inoue's Natural Blue, and Shigeo Tanaka's Prosecutor Saburo Kirishima, all released in 1964, she left Daiei, and her swan song was Gammera. Harumi moved on to television, but made a cameo appearance in 1968 for Norifumi Suzuki's Secret of the Philpot, before becoming a housewife and retiring from show business altogether. The last two lines in this scene, in which Yamamoto responds to Aoyagi's insistence on being his goddess of luck and his heartfelt reassurance, were not in Takahashi's screenplay. Here we have Nobuyo, the teenage sister of Toshio, who was originally written as his mother. The scene here was different in the original screenplay and comprised of 3 scenes, 44 to 46, starting at the lighthouse. 3 of Toshio's classmates come calling for him, and Toshio's mother comes out to see what the fuss is about. She tells him where he is, and the boys find Toshio playing with the turtle. They ask him if he wants to build model kits or listen to records with them, but Toshio wants to be left alone. The kids tell this to Nobuyo, who has had enough of Toshio's aberrant behavior. A revised scene of the boys was shot but deleted from the film. The child actors were Hideyuki Aoki, Shigeo Hagiwara, and Toru Furuya of Himawari. Aoki appeared in Episode 7 of Ultra Q 1966, while Furuya, who appeared in Episode 13 of Ultra Q and Episode 1 of The Space Giants, went on to a prolific career as a voice actor. Not only was he the voice of the original Marine Boy in 1966, but also Amuro Ray in Mobile Suit Gundam 1979. His other roles include Tuxedo Mask in Sailor Moon and Ribbons Allmark in Gundam 00. Mr. Ueda, Toshio's teacher, was played by Ichigen Ohashi. He can also be seen in Tetsutaro Murano's Crest of Night 1965, Mitsuo Murayama's Student Yakuza 1965, Yasuzo Masamura's Nakano Spy School. Here we have Toshio Saccharide, played by Yoshio Yoshida. In the original screenplay, there seems to be little motivation for Toshio's anti-socialism, besides moving from school to school because of his father's job as lighthouse keeper. So Nobuyo was changed to the boy's sister, and it's explained that their mother died 3 years earlier. Yoshiro Kirihara, a former screen idol born as Yoshio Nakano in Hokkaido on March 11, 1939, plays the role of Toshio's father. He began his acting career winning Daiei's 4th New Faces talent contest and soon made his 1953 screen debut in Shigeo Nakaki's Bloodbath. Kirihara appeared in scores of high-profile films, including Kazuo Mori's 300 Miles Behind Enemy Lines, 1957, about the Russo-Japanese War, featuring a screenplay by Akira Kurosawa, and Satsuo Yamamoto's Bury Me Deep, 1963, based on a novel by Harold Q. Masur. During his early career, Kirihara dated the statuesque actress Fujiko Yamamoto, the first Miss Japan. After the closure of Daiei, he worked at other studios and settled on television, where he regulared or guest starred in over 100 television shows, usually playing villains, with the general exception of a few roles in fantasy series such as Kamen Rider 1971 and Ultraman 80 in 1980. Kirihara also appears in 3 more Gammera films, and we'll see him next as Professor Romano in Gammera vs. Barragan. Non-Asians might wonder why Gammera is an overgrown turtle, and why would that make a good monster? I mean, it's silly, right? In reality, the turtle or tortoise is a symbol of strength, wisdom, and longevity throughout Asia. The supernatural myths of these creatures have evolved over time and through cultures, from India to Japan, and through this process have developed their own unique tales and traits. In Hindu mythology, the world is thought to rest on the backs of 4 elephants standing on the shell of a turtle, Chukwa. while the second incarnation of Vishnu was the turtle Kurma. The Chinese also have myths concerning the world, not held up by a turtle, but rather that the inside of the shell is the sky, held up by its own vivisected limbs, with the earth under its shell. Throughout Asia, turtles are considered symbols of good fortune and peace. A part of Chinese astrology includes a tortoise in their 4 celestial animals, which are symbolic of the 4 directions, 4 elements, and 4 seasons. The Xuanwu, also known as the black tortoise, is a symbol for north, water, and winter, respectively. This is interesting because Gammera comes from the freezing Arctic, which is at the top of the world. This was also absorbed into other Asian cultures, with the Vietnamese having their own myths of turtle deities. In Japan, Xuanwu became Gembu. Gembu and turtles in general developed further than their Chinese counterparts, becoming a symbol of protection and determination because of the resilience of its shell and its long life. An offshoot of Gembu is the Minogami, a creature said to be so ancient that it developed a train of kelp from its shell, and another serves an important function in the folktale of Urashima Taro, where a giant turtle carries a young man to meet a princess at the bottom of the sea. A symbol of immortality, sailors and fishermen pray to the sea tortoise at Kompira Shrine in Niigata, the home of the guardian deity of seafarers, while the Ainu in Hokkaido saw the tortoise as a messenger of the deep, which could wreak lethal retribution against unbelievers. So the Japanese have a long and interesting mythology involving these creatures, which is somewhat lost in modern Westerners, disconnected from such ancient roots, even the ancient Western myths of these creatures. The visual effects in this sequence are especially good because of the moody black and white photography by Tsukiji, who incorporates a rarely employed zoom, which was uncommon in kaiju eiga before this film. The accumulative effect, with atmospheric lighting by Mamoru Ishizaka, is very dreamlike. I have a feeling that this film wouldn't have looked quite as good in color. Now, why does Gammera save Toshio after killing the complement of the Chidori Maru? I can't answer that question, except that it was done to give the character a connection with the children in the audience. Gammera, while saving one child, certainly isn't so selective when he later attacks Tokyo, stomping and incinerating scores of men, women, and presumably children. Now, Toshio becomes a very important character in the narrative of this film, and we'll get back into a little bit of what Toshio's psyche is like. A very flawed and strange and abnormal character for a film like this, and certainly not a very sympathetic character. Now, just look at Toshio's eyes. This kid is a kook. Now, Toshio Saccharide was played by Yoshio Yoshida, who was born December 14, 1953 in Toyohashi, Aichi Prefecture. A child actor with the Himawari theatrical troupe, Yoshida began his career at the age of 11 and made his screen debut in Gammera. While he was under contract with Daiei, they also loaned him out to other studios and production companies, and he appeared in Eizuo Sugawa's Poneglyph Time, 1967, and Shiro Toyoda's Portrait of Hell in 1969. At Daiei, Uchida was cast in Michihiko Nobumori's racy high school blues film series and Yasuzo Masamura's House of Building Blocks in 1968. After Daiei's bankruptcy, he joined the talent agency juggernaut Johnny & Associates. While cast in scores of television shows, Uchida also pursued a singing career, and in 1971 released his first single, Mr. Robinson, a cover of Ichiro Araki's 1969 hit. Uchida performed on stage with the popular vocal group The Four Leaves, featuring Toshio Egi from the Space Giants, but eventually left his career to open a coffee shop in 1988. Uchida continues to sing today, performing live as a chanteur, a singer of French songs known as chanson. This sequence with Toshio sneaking out of the house to look for Pee-wee is not in the original screenplay, so Toshio never makes the statement that his turtle is transformed into Gammera, nor is it mentioned at all. In the screenplay, Toshio is an introverted social misfit, while in the film he is given a much more deeper flaw. Obviously disturbed by his mother's death, he becomes increasingly more delusional and suicidal as the narrative progresses. Toshio is a singularly odd character in the kaiju eiga. Despite all of this turtle mythology, Gammera was not Daiei's first plan for a giant monster movie. In 1963, Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds was an international hit, and Daiei wanted to do their own version, but with completely different animals. At the time, there was a news story about an outbreak in the rat population on an island in the Seto Inland Sea, and that became the basis of the story. Nezura, the giant swarming beast, was a premise that featured the mutation of sewer rats into 7-foot-long, man-eating monsters after consuming an experimental foodstuff a la H.G. Wells' The Food of the Gods. The giant rodents begin breeding in vast numbers and then swarm over the streets of Tokyo to devour its populace. Director Mitsuo Murayama was slated to helm the proposed 1964 film. Murayama had previous experience with visual effects films, including The Invisible Man Meets the Fly Man in 1957. In charge of the visual effects, Tsukiji hoped to bring the creatures to life via stop-motion animation combined with man-in-the-suit effects for scenes with actors, and footage of live rats. After the idea to use time-consuming stop-motion was dropped, a monster suit was commissioned from Toho's Masao Yagi, who worked on the original Godzilla, and a radio-controlled robot built by sculptor Ryosaka Takayama, who went on to create Daimajin and monsters for the Ultraman series. But after a series of camera tests, it was decided to go with live rats instead. At first, lab rats were used, but proved too docile, and not as intimidating as their sewer-dwelling cousins, so wild rats were rounded up for the film. But they proved extremely difficult to work with. They avoided the hot studio lights needed for high-speed photography, fought amongst themselves, engaged in cannibalism, and could not be properly wrangled. The staff also had serious concerns over being bitten by the rats, fleas and ticks, sanitation, and other problems in using these wild rodents. Also, they were hard to contain, and some of the smarter rats managed to escape and head for darker pastures. Rumors floated out of the studio and stirred up natural concerns of the local residents and homeowners, who reported the production to the health center, akin to the health department in the U.S., who summarily ordered the production on Nezura to be shut down. Kojima, a Daiei Union chairman who was the assistant visual effects director on Nezura, said, "The final order from the health center was to dispose of the rats by cremating them with gasoline. This event had far more personal impact on me than anything we endured trying to shoot the film." Kojima left Daiei shortly thereafter and joined P Productions, where he worked on the visual effects for The Space Giants in 1966. Perhaps over issues concerning the treatment of the rats, Daiei suppressed the teaser trailer for Nezura for decades, and was eventually destroyed by Kadokawa Pictures when they took over the studio in 2002. On a side note, an independent direct-to-video movie, Nezula, the Rat Monster, having little to do with Daiei's version, was also released in 2002. With Gammera approaching the geothermal power plant, Dr. Hidaka meets with the commander of the self-defense force to discuss ideas on how to stop the monster. Played by character actor Jutaro Hojo, a staple in over 80 Daiei productions during the 60s, made his debut in Hiromu Egawa's Seven Violent Men, 1961, a Japanese take on Three Violent People, 1957, a Charlton Heston vehicle directed by Rudolph Mattei. Hojo was generally cast as heavies, being they criminals, gangsters, yakuza, or malcontent swordsmen. He makes a great impression as the ruthless Tanakura, the masterless samurai in Tokuzo Tanaka's Zatoichi the Fugitive, 1963, and he would go on to appear in several subsequent entries in that series as different characters. Likewise, he was cast the same way in other Daiei movie series such as Sleepy Eyes of Death, Woman Gambler, and Hoodlum Soldier. Hojo's fantasy film appearances include Gemba in Kenji Misumi's The Wrath of Daimajin, 1966, and Matsukawa in Tokuzo Tanaka's ghost story The Snow Woman, 1968. Of course, we'll see him next in Gammera vs. Barragan, Gammera vs. Gauss, and Gammera vs. Jiger. The realization of Gammera after the failure of Nezura is also an interesting and perhaps apocryphal story. In The Birth of the Atomic Terrapin, there's a lot more myth in the truth and truth in the myth, which has caused some interesting accusations to rise to the surface after all these years. The founder, president, and executive producer of Daiei, Masaichi Nagata, born in 1906, still wanted to get a piece of the action out of the monster movie market cornered by Toho. After all, Daiei did produce the first modern Japanese science fiction film, Enter the Invisible Man in 1949, directed by Shinsei Adachi with visual effects by Eiji Tsuburaya, and the first color Japanese science fiction film, Warning from Space, 1956, directed by Koji Ota with visual effects by Tetsuo Matoba and Yonesaburo Tsukiji. While both films are first, they failed to launch more of the same at Daiei. As the story goes, Nagata was returning to Japan from the U.S., and staring out of the windows, he spotted a cloud that looked like a giant tortoise flying through the sky. When he returned to the studio, at our next production meeting, he simply said, "Make a turtle fly!" Then I received a call from Yonesaburo Saito of the planning department, who said, "We're going to make a monster movie. Can you give us any ideas?" He came to me because I was considered the idea man back then. So over lunch that day, I wrote the treatment in just about 2 hours. Takahashi's 4-page treatment, A Fire-Eating Turtle Attacks Japan, contained all of the basic components of Gammera of which we are familiar. The monster's method of flight, his ability to breathe fire, and the structure is nearly identical to both the screenplay and the completed film. Originally, according to Tsukiji, the monster was to be named Gammera, Kame and Game being the Japanese words for turtle. But since it was so close to the Japanese pronunciation of the word Gammera, they changed the creature's name to Gammera. Nagata's claim of dreaming up Gammera from a turtle-shaped cloud was strongly refuted by manga artist and founder of Peak Productions, Tomio Sagisu. In 1962, Sagisu was shopping around a proposal for an anthology entitled Stop, a half-hour science fiction drama featuring a monster of the week brought to life by stop-motion animation. He took the proposal to all of the major studios, including Daiei, but was turned down due to the expense of shooting such a production. Sagisu went on to produce The Space Giants and Spectre Man. Once Gammera was released to the public, Sagisu called foul, claiming that Daiei had lifted from a sample teleplay for his Stop series. The teleplay in question had a passage that states, quote, "The turtle monster flies by pulling into its shell and shooting flames," unquote. After Sagisu's accusations, Tsukiji was quoted as saying in an interview that it was Nagata's son and junior producer, Hidemasa, who came up with the idea for Gammera. Sagisu scoffed that Tsukiji's statement was too convenient. Director Noriaki Iwasa chuckled that the story behind Nagata's inspiration for Gammera was either a cloud or an island, depending on who was telling the story. Quote, "Since I didn't hear it directly from him," said Iwasa, "I can't be too sure. Although, that's what everybody says, so it seems to have become the legend," unquote. Here we are introduced to Professor Murase, played by Jun Hamamura. Born as Takeshi Takeuchi on February 2, 1906, in Kazuya, Fukuoka Prefecture. His family being kimono merchants, he moved to Tokyo after graduating Fukuoka Business School and worked as a clerk in a dry goods shop. This was only to buy time until he was accepted into the Tokyo University of the Arts. In 1932, he became interested in acting when he saw a production by the Proletariat Theatrical Laboratory. He moved into acting the following year in stage productions. Hamamura landed some extra work in movies and then immigrated to Manchuria in 1937, where he became an acting instructor. Relocating to Harbin in northeast China, he worked for a real estate company and then as a constable, allowing him to pursue theater at night. Returning home in 1944, he concentrated on acting, changing his stage name to Jun Hamamura, but was sent back to Manchuria to entertain the troops. We'll return to Hamamura in a few minutes. Under Article 9 in the Japanese Constitution, ratified on November 3, 1946, it states that Japan renounces war in the name of international peace, justice, and order, and forbids the arming of forces with war potential. But it also allows a military home defense as an extension of the national police force. A revision to Article 9 further authorizes the use of military force only in self-defense against aggression directed against Japan. But after China's first nuclear weapons test in 1964, Prime Minister Eisaku Sato told U.S. President Lyndon Johnson when they met in January of 1965 that if Red China has nuclear weapons, so should Japan. The Japanese were also aware that the U.S. had nuclear warheads on 3 Japanese islands, and that U.S. aircraft, ships, and submarines in Japan were also armed with nuclear weapons. So, with this scene, it seems that the filmmakers are not only calling out the U.S., but also their own government's complacency as well. Are giant monsters a problem? Then don't wait. Call for a U.S. nuclear missile strike. Of course, unlike the real world we live in, cooler heads prevail. Returning to Japan in 1945, he joined a traveling acting troupe, but was stricken with tuberculosis. After a long recovery, he landed a role in Kaneto Shindo's Wolf in 1955, and then found himself third billed as Private Ito in Kon Ichikawa's The Burmese Harp in 1956. He was also cast in Ichikawa's 1985 remake. He played Doi-chi in Masaki Kobayashi's The Human Condition Part 2, 1959, and as Masahiro's father in Nagisa Oshima's Cruel Story of Youth, 1960. Hamamura appeared in over 120 films between 1955 and 1996 for legendary directors such as Akira Kurosawa, Shohei Imamura, and Masahiro Shinoda. These include Ichikawa's An Actor's Revenge, 1963, Tokuzo Tanaka's Zatoichi's Vengeance, 1966, Kobayashi's Rebellion in 1967, Shinoda's Double Suicide in 1969, and Kenji Misumi's Lone Wolf and Cub Baby Cart to Hades, 1972. His numerous fantasy film credits include Shinoda's Kwaidan, 1964, Kimiyoshi Yasuda's The 100 Monsters, 1968, Michio Yamamoto's The Vampire Doll, 1970, Toshio Masuda's The Prophecies of Nostradamus, 1974, and Shinoda's Demon Pawn, 1979. And that's a lot of films. Hamamura was also cast on television in both regular and guest star roles in everything from police to costume dramas, such as The Lone Wolf and Cub and Zatoichi television series. He was cast as pivotal characters in several special effects series, such as Dr. Faust in Little Devil in 1966 and Bago in Kamen Rider Amazon 1974. He also guested in episodes of Operation Mystery in 1968, Unbalanced in 1969, Return of Ultraman in 1971, and Ultraman Taro in 1973. Like Eiji Funakoshi, Hamamura was also made up to look much older than he really was for this film, wearing a wig and a Colonel Sanders beard, which kind of makes me hungry for chicken. On a more serious note, Hamamura succumbed to leukemia on June 21st, 1995 at the age of 89. Just like Toho's Godzilla series, a number of different various Gammeras were used to bring Gammera to life, all in different scales. Many of them were in the film, reportedly 25 in all, from close-up torsos to full monster suits. And I actually think that they were more successful than Toho in matching them because it's harder to tell the various different Gammeras apart from one another. This is a mechanical miniature created by Ryosaku Takayama, but we'll get back to how Gammera was created more in a moment. The memorable score for Gammera was composed and conducted by Tadashi Yamaguchi. Born on August 22, 1927, Yamauchi came from talented stock. His father, Ichiro Yamano, was a famous benshi, or silent film narrator, actor, and monologue comic. The young Yamauchi's original drive was to become a world-class violinist, and in 1940 he began studying violin and music theory under Heita Katsura. Sadly, his dreams were cut short during the war, when he incurred nerve damage to his fingers from overuse in heavy, manual labor. He returned back to his family in Tokyo, only to have their home destroyed in one of the Allied firebombings of the city. Because of his wartime experiences, he became fiercely anti-war and a staunch peace advocate. Graduating from the prestigious Shiba High School, he began to pursue music again, studying under Maestro Akira Ifukube in 1953. His Symphony in Yosempo went on to win the TBS Music Award in 1961. Yamauchi composed a wide range of pieces for orchestra, piano, ballet, vocals, and guitar, as well as stage, television, and movie work. In addition to Gammera, Yamauchi scored a number of Yasuzo Masamura's films, including Black Test Car in 1964, Manji in 1964, and Nakano Spy School in 1966. Yamauchi returned to Giant Monsters again with Gammera vs. Gyaos in 1967. Interestingly, Yamauchi's brothers are author and screenwriter Hisashi Yamauchi, who wrote Shohei Imamura's Pigs and Battleships in 1961, and acclaimed stage, film, and television actor Akira Yamauchi, who starred as Dr. Yano in Yoshimitsu Banno's Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster in 1971. Ekis Productions, founded by the Yagi family, ex-Toho employees who made monsters for Eiji Tsuburaya, including the original Godzilla, designed and created the Gammera suits and props. Their first workshop was a large tin building adjacent to the family home. Among them were designers Michio Mikami and fabricator Keizo Murase, who also left Toho after their contracts expired. The founder and eldest son, Masao Yagi, said, "My father died the same year that we made Gammera, but while he was under home treatment, would lay in his futon and bark orders about ingredients and mixtures, while my son was molding Gammera's shell. It was really a family business," he laughed. Since Gammera is a turtle, it would also be nearly impossible to render it as a man-in-suit creation without concessions. Therefore, we had to do away with designs that were too close to the real animals and create one that a man could move inside of." Unquote. Working closely with production designer Akira Inoue, Ekis Productions hit upon the proper balance. The Gammera was made from an early foam of foam rubber latex, mixed with lime, sulfur, and salt to get the right formula. Yagi said, quote, "I had previous experience working on Godzilla suits, so I was able to make Gammera lighter than Godzilla ever was." Still, the final suit was over 6.5 feet tall and weighed 110 pounds. Yagi said, quote, "We had to add a degree of thickness to the costume because Gammera breathes real fire, and we wanted to make sure the actor inside would not be injured. We had to be extremely careful. Since this made the suit extremely heavy, we also created another, lighter suit. For some of the scenes where Gammera breathes fire, we also built a model of just its torso. Still, I would have to repair Gammera's mouth at the end of each day." End quote. Now here's where Gammera goes from monster to super monster. This is one of the most audacious attributes of any giant monster. Gammera is a monster with rockets in his pockets, to paraphrase Cleveland horror host The Ghoul. To create this effect, a combination of practical effects and optical animation were employed. According to practical effects engineer Haruo Sekiya, Gammera's flying scenes were tricky. Quote, "A take would be ruined if the gunpowder didn't burn correctly or if Gammera fell when he was flying. To achieve the spinning, we would attach 3 wires to a motor and then attach the wires to the shell. But even the shell would be uneven, so we'd have to allow one wire to be longer than the others in order to maintain a proper balance. At first, we would have to slowly accelerate Gammera's spinning, otherwise the piano wires would snap. We would also have to decelerate when he landed, for the same reason. Timing on the acceleration and deceleration was extremely important because we couldn't simply shut the motor off. We ended up doing this over and over until we got it down." End quote. Eki built several flying shells in case of damage or destruction when filming these dangerous pyrotechnical scenes. Even with the optical animation, Yuasa was not entirely satisfied with these scenes and wondered if audiences would believe that a turtle could fly. And still to this day, a lot of people don't. A lot of people really do think that this is kind of a ridiculous thing for a monster to do, but it certainly is unique and very memorable because people are still watching these movies today, more than 40 years later. This is the revised scene with the old farmer, wife, and grandson, which was moved from earlier in the picture. The farmer's wife is actress Fumiko Murata, who played Kyoko's mother in Yasuzo Masamura's Giants and Toys, while Shigeru Kato plays their grandson. This scene where Toshio is almost hit by a car and Nobuo discovering the rocks he has smuggled with him from Hokkaido was not in the original screenplay. Here, Nobuo is becoming more concerned for her brother, who is now delusional, insisting that his turtle has transformed into Gammera. Playing Nobuo is Michiko Sugata, a singer and actress who was born as Ikuko Tachibana on May 28, 1945, in Sapporo, Hokkaido. In 1961, while attending her first year at the second junior and senior high school of Nihon University, she was scouted by Daiei Studios, and before she knew it, she was immediately placed opposite singer Yukio Hashi in his screen debut, The Lord and the Amazon, directed by Kimiyoshi Yasuda. She was officially signed to Daiei that October. The following year, she replaced actress Mako Sanjo, who was involved in an undisclosed accident, in the title role of Eriko, based on Yukio Hashi's hit song. Her star rose quickly at Daiei, playing the very model of young women in Haruo Harada's The Trees of Youth, 1963, Yoshio Inoue's 3 High School Freshmen, 1963, and Yuasa's If You're Happy, Clap Your Hands, 1964. Not only was she then cast to contrast against tough guy actors like Raizo Ichikawa, Shintaro Katsu, and Jiro Tamiya in such films as Kenji Misumi's Sleepy Eyes of Death, Sword of Fire, 1965, Akira Inoue's Drunken Doctor Part 2, 1966, Shigeo Inoue's Fighting Dogs in 1967, but she also proved herself adept at comedy, appearing in Shunkai Mizuho's Hot Springs Woman and Haruo Harada's Hot Springs Cop, both in 1963. Sugata left Daiei in 1968 and moved to television, and retired from show business in 1971 when she married Tokyo Giants pitcher Makoto Kurata. Her younger sister was Nikatsu Studio starlet Katsuo Tachibana. The director of photography on Gammera was Nobuo Munekawa, a solid and dependable cinematographer who shot Yuasa's first feature, If You're Happy, Clap Your Hands, in 1964. And turning as an assistant cameraman in the 1940s at Daiichi, which later became Daiei, he became a DP in the 1950s. His most notable films are Taro Yuge's Woman Gambler and Yasuzo Masamura's Two Wives, both produced in 1967. This is the fish shop owned by Nobuo and Toshio's uncle, who is putting the two up while they're living in Tokyo. The uncle was played by character actor Tsutomu Nakata, who appeared in over 100 films starting in the 1950s and was cast in a number of woman gambler movie series with Kyoko Inami. Fans in Japan best remember Nakata as the comic relief Monta Tonda in the 1959 Daiei-produced television series Jet Boy, based on the manga by Tsuneyoshi Takeuchi. Nakata appears in several Gammeras, returning next as Professor Amano's assistant in Gammera vs. Barragan in 1966. The unbilled Saburo Kirihara played Toshio's cousin, Ichiro. Many of these child actors, who would appear in films and television shows, generally would not make the transition into lifelong acting careers, just like their counterparts in the United States, and would return to normal life. Kirihara also appears in episode 16 of the series Ultra Q. Now, this line coming up where Nobuya tells her uncle that it's best that Ichiro threw the stones away is not in the original screenplay. Now here is the only scene where Sugata gets to wear her hair down and look like the lovely young woman she was, and not the surrogate mother her character called for. Following this in the original screenplay was scene 114, where Toshio has a dream involving Gammera. In that dream, both he and Gammera are romping, laughing, and playing together. While the scene was dropped, it's uncertain whether or not it was shot, since there are several other such deletions, but with actors listed for those scenes. Now, would that scene really be appropriate for this film, or would it just be completely ridiculous? A dream sequence finally did make its way into Gammera vs. Gauss in 1967. Scene 115, a news report on the mysterious occurrences in Tokyo Bay, was moved to a later spot in the film. This scene was a revision of scenes 118 to 121, featuring Dr. Hidaka in a radio, not a television station, which cut to shots of listeners at home. Instead of informing the public on Gammera, his speech is alarmist, with phrases like, "Terror is coming from the sky!" This is broadcast throughout a kindergarten school PA, causing the teacher to urge her students to hurry home to their families. Actress Misa Kawashima was cast as the teacher, but it's unknown as whether or not this scene was indeed shot. This sequence here concludes with Dr. Hidaka and Kyoko in the original script, as he urges the station staff to evacuate and avoid the coming bloodbath. Perhaps this was a bit out of step for the character and was changed. Gammera's attack on Tokyo was to have immediately followed this scene. Instead, in the film, Dr. Hidaka warns that Gammera may search out atomic stockpiles to consume. The Institute director, Senner, is played by Osamu Maruyama, who began his film career in the 1940s and appeared in over 120 films at Daiei, including Gammera vs. Gauss and Yuasa's Snake Girl and the Silver-Haired Witch in 1968. Toshio Maki and Kazuo Sumida play the commissioners. Maki also appears in Gammera vs. Gauss and Gammera vs. Jiger in 1970. Now, this is the Tsukiji Fish Market, the largest of its kind and the largest food market in the world, located in central Tokyo. The character actors here are Kyosuke Shiho, Ken Nakahara, and Shinji Sayama, who all appeared together in Yasuzo Masamura's Red Angel in 1966. Shiho also appears in Gammera vs. Gauss, vs. Jiger, and vs. Zigra, while Nakahara appears in Gammera vs. Gauss, Virus, Jiger, and Zigra. Originally appearing earlier in the screenplay as Scene 115 is this news broadcast, which was rewritten to include a kinder, gentler public safety warning from Dr. Hidaka. The newscaster is Yuji Moriyama, who appeared in numerous films and plays a similar role in Gammera vs. Barragan in 1966. Gammera's film editor was Tatsuji Nakashizu, who cut over 100 pictures during his more than 3 decades in the business. Working his way up from an assistant, he became the essential editor for some of Japan's greatest directors, including Kon Ichikawa. Nakashizu cut Ichikawa's The Pit in 1957, Fires on the Plain 1959, and Tokyo Olympiad 1965. But Nakashizu's greatest association was with Yasuzo Masamura, beginning in 1957 with the director's first controversial feature, Kiss. Until Daiei's bankruptcy in 1971, Nakashizu edited close to 50 of Masamura's films, including Giants and Toys 1958, Afraid to Die 1960, Black Test Car 1962, Manji 1964, Red Angel 1966, and The Blind Beast in 1969. In 1972, they collaborated again on the ATG production of Music, followed by Drifting Islands in 1975, Double Suicide at Sonzaki in 1978, and For My Daughter's 7th Birthday in 1982. Nakashizu also returned to edit the next 2 Gammeras. In 1977, he cut the domestic version of the Tsuburaya Productions Rankin Bass co-production, The Last Dinosaur. The narrator is the unbilled actor Shizo Chujo, born March 30th, 1926, who had a commanding presence even in high school. He joined Daiei in 1948, maintained a long career in mostly minor roles, but that all changed in 1965 when he was signed to the regular cast of the television series The Guardmen, starring Ken Utsui. The police drama ran for 6 years, 350 episodes, and 2 feature films before Daiei folded. Typecast, Chujo turned to stage acting and spent the next several years in a number of respected theatrical groups. Now able to choose the roles he wanted, he appeared in such productions as the lauded police drama The Big City, produced by superstar Yujiro Ishihara. Becoming one of the most sought-after actors on television, Chujo picked up steam through the 1980s. He endured himself to a whole new generation with his role as Bay Police Chief Detective Takuzo Kondo in the hugely popular television and movie series Dangerous Cops, which started in 1986. Working until the end, he passed away on October 5, 1994. Toru Munakawa's 1996 film Dangerous Cops Return was dedicated to his memory. He also played Dr. Tokaido in the superhero series Iron Man Tiger 7 in 1973. Gammera's landing at Haneda Airport, located in Tokyo, was originally written to occur earlier in the film, but was pushed back and revised for the final edit. The air controller, played by Ryuji Fuji, calls out "Gamera" before it crashes into the building, not after. Gammera also continues to fly during the scene and doesn't come out of his shell on screen. Then, instead of cutting to the teen discotheque as in the final film, we have scene 124, another radio announcement, causing people to panic, while scene 125 shows human chaos in a subway entrance. This concludes with scene 126, a hospital evacuation. Now we cut to Club Beat, where some hodads are going ape over the boss surf sounds of this real gas combo. Now, who are they? We don't know, but the legendary U.S. group The Ventures influenced them. During the 1960s, The Ventures outsold the Beatles in Japan by 2-1, according to the January 1966 issue of Billboard magazine, which also stated that The Ventures had 5 singles on the Japanese top 10 charts during 1965 alone. Now, don't trust anyone over 30 unless they're Japanese, because they've survived a monster attack. Now the Fuzz make the scene to tell all the Grammys to bug out. What a drag, man. Actor and comedian Kenichi Tani plays the cop, and Akira Shimizu plays the teenager. Tani started at Daiei in the 1950s and continued with them to the end. Shimizu appeared in a number of films between 1961 and 1965, but seems to have left acting. Could he be the same Akira Shimizu, the professional mahjong player? The latter, born in 1949, would be the right age. The original screenplay, scene 127 to 128, has Gammera entering Tokyo, before the discotheque scene, and destroying a monorail track built for the 1964 Olympics, connecting Haneda Airport to the Minato Ward. In it, Gammera picks up one of the monorail cars and throws it back down. Then Gammera destroys the centerpiece of the Minato Ward Tokyo Tower. In the finished film, Gammera smashes through Ginza and destroys the tracks for the Shinkansen, or bullet train, also introduced in 1964 for the Olympics, before advancing on to Minato and Tokyo Tower. On constructing the miniature sets, Haruo Sekiya said, quote, "We would make some of the buildings in plaster if we wanted to have certain parts of the miniature destroyed. We would also hide small reinforcement bars so that when they were demolished, you would be able to see them. We thought that this was a realistic touch," end quote. Instead of the time-consuming and expensive optical animation for Gammera's fire breathing, Tsukiji opted for using real flames, created with pressurized propane, which was highly dangerous. While some of the filmmakers have claimed that there were no incidents, there was a story of one of the props blowing up during a shoot. Thankfully, no one was injured. In scene 129 of the original screenplay, as Gammera takes out Tokyo Tower, all of the principal characters are watching from the windows of the Defense Ministry building, including Nobuo and Toshio, who begs Gammera to stop. In the finished film, only the officials are in the building, while Toshio pleads with Gammera from his uncle's veranda in a later scene. Now, you also recall the mishap when shooting this scene, saying, when Gammera destroys Tokyo Tower, the timing was off, and the miniature was pulled over before he even touched it. Someone rushed in to prevent it from falling. Fortunately, we shot an insert, and were able to save the sequence in editing, end quote. Another deleted sequence, scenes 130 to 132, was set in a strip club dressing room. Yes, that's what I said, a strip club. Two strippers are chatting while changing and hear Gammera's footfalls. They never realize that their lives are in danger until the Terrapin's Pes Planus comes crashing through the roof. The strippers are played by Chizuru Ko and Ryoko Oki, who are listed in the film's credits, despite the removal of the scene. The next scene, 133, set in the revolving Sky Lounge on the 17th floor of the Hotel New Otani, was also deleted. The hotel was opened in 1964, again for the Olympics. Actress Wakayo Matsumura is credited as the screaming patron. The next scene, 134, the teen discotheque sequence, was filmed and moved to an earlier place. This scene was originally part of 129 in the original screenplay and was set in the Defense Ministry. It was changed to their uncle's house as Nobuo packs to evacuate, while Toshio pleads with Gammera not to do anything bad. Toshio's delusion is at its zenith, and he ignores the devastation around him. Now, this is a great outdoor shot of Gammera with plumes of atmospheric smoke rising from the carnage, showing what could be done with open set photography instead of miniature soundstage sets. While the use of newsreel footage from the aftermath of real disasters also lends a sense of gravity and realism to the film and Gammera's rampage the night before. As Nobuo and her uncle and Ichiro prepare to evacuate, they realize that Toshio is nowhere to be found. In the background is the Kachidoki Bridge on the Sumida River, one of the few wartime landmarks of Tokyo that hasn't succumbed to the glass and chrome modernization of the late 20th century. And by the way, Godzilla destroyed the bridge in the original 1954 film. Abdul Apanai and Muneko Takada play the American and Soviet scientific team leaders respectively. Takada, born Yoshimi Matsumoto on September 15, 1916, is the father of actress Rumi Matsumoto. Because of his mixed parentage and tall stature, Takada passed as Caucasian and would generally be cast as such in Japanese films. His role as Black Devil, the international thief, in the Jet Boy television series created a sensation, but it also sent mixed messages to Japanese children about foreigners. This and problems with his private life dampened his career and created a struggle for him during the 1960s. But after Daiei's bankruptcy, Takada became a successful drama coach. He appeared in Yasuzo Matsumura's Giants and Toys in 1958 and returned for 3 more Gammera films. We'll see him next in Gammera vs. Gyaos. There's not much information on Abdul Apanai, listed as M. Apanai in the credits, the M presumably standing for Mohammed, aside from being an expat Turk. During the early part of the 20th century, groups of Volga Tatars emigrated to Japan from Kazan, Russia, eventually gaining their Japanese citizenship in the 1950s. They became involved in the Japanese film industry, filling in roles as foreigners, with the advantage of being Japanese fluent. If you watch some films from this period carefully, you'll see Apanai pop up in numerous roles or simply in the background. Now, I told you this kid is nuts. Desperate to see Gammera, Toshio walks 12 miles from Tsukiji to Kawasaki to get up close and personal with the colossal Colonian. Of course, Toshio couldn't have taken any public transportation because we have to assume that much of it would have been closed down during such a disaster or destroyed by Gammera. Here at Kawasaki, Gammera is allowed to gorge on copious amounts of petroleum in order to keep him in place. This is so that the monster can be lured to the Zee Plan facilities at Oshima Island. While there are numerous oil refineries throughout Japan, the plants in Kawasaki are those usually destroyed in most fantasy films and television shows, such as Tsuburaya Productions' Ultraman in 1966, Shiro Murakami's Submersion of Japan in 1973, and Jun Fukuda's Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla in 1974. To simulate the refinery fires, rags were soaked in flammable liquids such as kerosene or gasoline and mixed with metal powders, which would produce the billowing black smoke. Many of these effects were shot on miniature outdoor sets because of the extremely toxic conditions. The oil refinery foreman is played by Koji Fujiyama, another stalwart character actor, also billed as Koichi Fujiyama, who began his career at Daiei in the late 1950s. He was featured as Tadao Yokoyama in Yasuzo Matsumura's Giants and Toys in 1958, and appeared in such films as Kenji Misumi's Zatoichi Challenged in 1967, and Shunya Ito's female prisoner Scorpion, Beast Stable in 1973. Now, while everything seems in generally proportionate scale in regards to the miniatures and the miniature sets, These tank cars that you'll see here seem to be about half the size that they should be. But considering what Tsukiji had to work with, including the schedule and other production conditions, it's forgivable. Now, the burly Fujiyama was also cast in several Gammera films and will return as Onodera in the next entry, Gammera vs. Barragan. The troubled character of Toshio, who causes nothing but distress to those around him, might generate some form of sympathy or empathy from children in the audience, but he really makes me want to slap him upside the head. You said it, Fujiyama. This kid is out of his mind. When Harris Associates Incorporated originally purchased Gammera for the U.S., scenes were trimmed and discarded, and new footage with American actors was shot to replace the less-than-stellar expat scene at the top of the film. This called for dropping some of Toshio's exposition and improving the film, so to speak. They also used a couple of visual effect shots not found in the Japanese version, such as a nice medium-long shot of Gammera approaching the geothermal power plant. The original U.S. version also narrows the focus onto the main trio, who are the real human center of the film, and not Toshio. Production on Gammera commenced in the fall of 1965 with the visual effects, starting on September 16th and wrapping on November 11th for a total of 60 days. Live action commenced on October 1st and wrapped on November 9th, including shooting on location in Hokkaido and on Oshima for a total of 55 days. The completed film premiered in Japanese theaters a mere 16 days later on November 27th, not accounting for the time involved on post-production. This is a testament to the veracity, dedication, hard work, and skill of Japanese filmmakers. Among the scientists seen here, second from the left, is the unbilled Enver Altanbay, one of the most visible of the Turks working in Japanese films. He appeared credited and uncredited in dozens, such as Kinji Fukasaku's The Green Slime in 1968, and television shows such as Ultraman in 1966. There were several Altanbays working on Japanese films. The whole family, actually. And one of them, Mo Altanbay, is the father of WWE wrestler Victoria, a.k.a. Lisa Marie Veron. Not only was Gammera difficult to produce, but there were also other hurdles to leap. Director Yuasa, whose first film, If You're Happy, Clap Your Hands, tanked, causing his seniors and peers at Daiei to doubt that he had much of a career as a director in him, while others were genuinely concerned for his future. When Gammera was in the planning stages, Umetsugu Inoue, the director of the mega hit The Man Who Causes a Storm 1957, starring Yujiro Ishihara, recommended his assistant director for the job. Inoue told Yuasa that Gammera was his last chance as a director, while others called him an idiot for taking on a monster movie. Even art director Akira Inoue was concerned. Quote, "I never expected such a young director to be placed in charge of such a large-scale production." End quote. All of this weighed heavily on Yuasa's mind, but he was determined to go for broke. Even though he dedicated so much of himself, he rubbed a couple of people the wrong way. Quote, "There were two visual effects photographers on Gammera. One was Mr. Tsukiji, the other was another veteran who considered me a complete novice. He finally lost his temper with me on the show and yelled, 'Who the hell do you think you are?' While Yuasa doesn't name the man, it must have been Yuzo Kaneko." While executive producer Masaichi Nagata believed in the project, the other Daiei executives weren't so enthusiastic. During rushes or dailies, they would say discouraging things like, "Is that it? Or is this what we're wasting our money on?" It was a frustrating experience for Yuasa, but that all changed when they screened a rough print with the music and sound effects. Then the reaction from them was quite different, chuckled Yuasa. Eventually, the young director began sticking up for himself. When a longtime Daiei foreman condescendingly said, "So do you think you're going to be called Eiji Tsuburaya around here?" Yuasa retorted, "Around here I will be." From then on, Yuasa concluded, he left me alone. This is a nice composite shot here, combining a live element, matte painting, and miniature set. Yuasa is very concerned with the film's optical effects, even consulting with Tsuburaya's people at Toho. Quote, I decided to study as much as I could about the optical and map processes, and spent so much time over at Tokyo Laboratories working on their optical printer, it seemed like I was there every day. The schedule was so hectic that Yuasa was even sleeping at the studio. In developing the character of the monster itself, Yuasa stated, we were trying to come up with some sort of aim or hook for Gammera. It turned out that Gammera was sort of on the side of children. We didn't want to make it overtly so, otherwise the company would have wondered, what were we thinking? However, there's a scene where Gammera coincidentally knocks over the lighthouse and puts his hand out and saves Toshio. The kids who saw that scene had a great reaction to it. Screenwriter Takahashi said, I think it's a blessing that somehow or other Tsukiji-san and Yuasa-san were able to put all my ideas together. I always thought while I was writing the screenplay, well, they should be able to get this up on the screen, and I imagined what would or might not be possible. There was not one time where the staff said, this is going to be too difficult to shoot, can you change it? As a child, I loved reading science and technical books, and in college I studied electrical engineering. So I think that background helped me a lot in writing these films. But there is no limit to what you can do if you have a dream. After all, I was able to create a series of films about a turtle that flies. I hope that when you watch these films, it takes you back to when you were a child and believe once again that you can do anything. Haruo Sekiya said, I started out as a gaffer and then went into practical effects. As far as visual effects and things such as Gammera breathing fire, having him fly, these were all new techniques for me. We didn't have a major visual effects department like Toho did till after the first film. In the beginning, we didn't even know where they sold piano wire. We didn't even know how to attach them to the suits or anything. I knew how to light the eyes in the suit, and I had made whirlpools in the water, but that's all I ever had done. Takahashi also recalled, I do remember that when they lured Gammera out to the island, Tsukiji-san wanted to do it differently, but my idea to put holes in a vinyl water hose and hide that just below the surface of the water, and then pump gasoline through it. That was my idea. When ignited, it created a fire path. We asked the staff for ideas, and as you can see, they went with mine, he laughed. Now, it was during the shooting of these shots of Gammera, eating the flames from Kawasaki to Oshima Island, where the unmanned prop blew up. And again, as mentioned earlier, no one was hurt. But it took Tsukiji and his special effects crew over a week to repair it and get it ready to complete all the shots required. Another shot of Gammera in the water, with the suit actor, was almost a fatality when a lighting rig fell into the water. Thankfully, nobody was electrocuted in the accident. Now, over the years, a lot of people have been curious as to how Gammera's voice was created. Now, with Godzilla, a lot of us know that the composer Akira Ifukube took a resin-coated glove and pulled it across the string of a contrabass, and of course played with speeds and pitches to create Godzilla's famous roar. Originally, they were trying to use animal sounds, voices of various people, and other recording tricks, but nothing was satisfactory until Ifukube came up with the roar that was heard around the world. As far as Gammera's roar, Yuasa said, because Gammera is an animal, we recorded a number of them for his roar. Unfortunately, I don't remember exactly which animals were used, but there were quite a few. There were so many different patterns and sounds used for his roars. For Gammera's footfalls, we would use the stilts of a geta, Japanese wooden sandals, and bang them on the ground. We would change pitches and change the timing on the recordings. For his regular roars, sound effects engineer Nobuyushi Ogura employed animals, but we also used human voices too. There was a man named Okuyama, and we would record his voice, change the speed, pitch, and so on. There were a lot of tricks performed, as I said, but we spent a lot of time and paid so much attention to detail just for Gammera's voice alone. Because of the typhoon, Gammera starts to turn away from Oshima Island, and the scientists resign themselves to the failure of the Zee Plan. But there is someone amongst them who has an inspiring idea. Here we discover that the saboteur, or what seems to be a saboteur, is really Aoyagi, who has joined the project as a laborer. Now, the trio is reunited for the finale. Earlier in the film, Dr. Hidaka tells the Self-Defense Forces commander that Aoyagi may come up with some ideas. Here, he finally does. Gammera loves fire, so they begin setting them in a desperate maneuver to lure Gammera back onto land and closer to the Zee Plan. When creating the suits for Gammera, Yuasa was particularly concerned with the shape of the terrapin shell. Quote, "If you're not careful about the shape, it won't look like a turtle. So, to ensure the proper shape, we used steel wire to create a support frame. But this added a lot of weight to the suits. It got to the point where all I heard was, 'Director, I can't move!' So we hired a few professionals to get into the suits and move around in them. But it was very, very difficult for them. At first, several strong actors were pulled in, but none of them could take more than 10 minutes in the suits. Most of them didn't want to get back in. Yuasa even had to solicit some bodybuilders from a local university, but even all of them quit after only a day of work. It was then down to the staff. Each of them had to pull lots every morning to decide who was going to get into the damn thing. Many of these people remain nameless, except for one, Kazuo Yagi of Ekis Productions. Because his family was hired for visual effects on the show, Kazuo was obligated to suffer as the suit actor that did the most time as Gammera, although he never received an on-screen credit. Yuasa said, "I really think that someone was watching over us on that film, because we were able to pull it off." Now, while it looks like Gammera will get away a second time, by pure chance, Mount Mihara erupts, keeping Gammera on Oshima. Now, Oshima Island is a real island located about 60 miles south of Tokyo, and Mount Mihara is a real active volcano, which has major eruptions every 100 years or so. From the top of the cone, there is a vantage point that looks straight into the lava, which made this place a venue for suicides starting in the 1920s. Authorities eventually erected a fence to prevent such incidents. Oshima Island is also featured in Ichiro Honda's Atragon, 1963, and also features Mount Mihara. Mount Mihara is also a central location in Koji Hashimoto's Return of Godzilla, produced in 1984, and Kazuki Omori's Godzilla vs. Biollante, produced in 1989. The volcanic eruption keeps Gammera on Oshima, and the scientists will prepare to launch Zee Plan to eradicate Gammera. Of course, volcanoes are also delicious. Dr. Murase and Nobuo fly in from Kawasaki to meet up with her brother and the Zee Plan team. Now, even in scenes not involving monsters, the Japanese love to incorporate miniatures of even the most mundane scenes, such as a car crashing or a plane flyby. This is part of what they call tokusatsu, the art of Japanese visual effects. This love of miniatures for the sake of miniatures was also the credo of Jerry Anderson's Supermarionation shows. Together with Dr. Murase, Nobuo is finally reunited with her brother. And now all of the main characters are dovetailed back together for the climax, the commencement of the Zee Plan. This matte painting, showing the interior of the Zee Plan facilities, recalls similar and fanciful matte paintings in American science fiction films of the 1950s, such as This Island Earth, 1955, Forbidden Planet, 1956, and Chronos in 1957, especially the latter, which was shot in black and white. At a studio screening of the finished film, everyone remained absolutely quiet. This made Yuasa uneasy. Quote, "After the lights came up, I remember looking over at the silent President Nagata. I nervously said, Mr. President, what do you think?" He responded, "Amusing! That was really amusing!" "Well," chuckled Yuasa, "at least they liked it." Here, Dr. Hidaka calls the shots in launching the Zee Plan, but in the original screenplay, it is the American and Soviet scientists who make the operational calls and the countdown. This was changed to keep Dr. Hidaka in the forefront of the action, and because he's Japanese. In a 1998 BBC documentary, Yuasa wanted to underline that Japanese monsters are very different from those featured in films from the West, due to different cultural perspectives and religious practices that define a people. In a Japanese monster movie, the monsters have a very different function. They can be heroes, friends, something like that. Other ideologies divide man from the supernatural. But Japan doesn't have that separation. We have many different kinds of gods. Even the water in a glass contains some element of the divine. And that is a very different ideology, isn't it? When Godzilla first appeared, it was a Japanese-style monster movie, and it had serious subtext about war. But by the time we made Gammera, things had changed. We found ourselves making a different kind of monster movie. Gammera is a giant monster, and his job is to look after children. The original Gammera films, even the lighter, child-oriented entries to follow, had a darker, grittier streak to them, and were far more violent than Toho's monster movies of the mid to late 60s. With notable exception of Ishiro Honda's The World of Gargantua, produced in 1966. In conclusion, Yuasa said, "In the first film, we had Gammera shot off into space. Daiei decided that they did not want to have Gammera killed at the end of the first film, although there were no thoughts at the time of producing a sequel. But the film turned out to be a tremendous success, and within a half a year, we had our first sequel completed." End quote. In the 1990s, I was fortunate to have met Noriaki Yuasa on several occasions. He was a wonderful, fun-loving, humorous, gentle man, and I really hope that I expressed to him, on the behalf of Western Gammera fans everywhere, how much his work was appreciated and cherished. Sadly, Mr. Yuasa passed away in 2004, and he will be greatly missed. Now, these are fun and entertaining films that are permeated with fantastic elements, things that defy logic, and take you to a world that could never really exist. I enjoy these films as much as I do Toho's brand of kaiju eiga, and after meeting Mr. Yuasa, I could truly see his heart in every one of his films. And I think you can too, if you really look. So give these films a chance. And here, Dr. Hidaka finally gives his blessings to Kyoko and Aoyagi, but doesn't pander and ask her to retire and change diapers, as what happened with the heroine in Nikatsu's 1967 monster opus, Gappa. And while Toshio seemed depressed and looked for kinship in Gammera during most of the film, he now seems to have come out of his darkness, and has something to live for. Who am I kidding? He's still a kook! Well, I hope you enjoyed listening and watching Gammera with me. I would like to dedicate this audio commentary to my late comrade Guy Tucker and to Gammera's father, director Noriaki Yuasa. Gammera will be back in Gammera vs. Barragan.